The morning sun cast long shadows across the flight line at Fort Campbell as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pulled her tool bag from the maintenance truck. The Kentucky air was crisp with the promise of another scorching summer day, but at 0600 hours, the concrete still held the coolness of night. She had been working on helicopters for 8 years, and the familiar weight of her tools felt like an extension of herself. Maria approached the Black Hawk helicopter designated as tail number 87 to 24,619, a UH-60M that had seen its share of deployments. The aircraft sat silent on the tarmac, its rotor blades tied down and secured. Today's maintenance was routine, a scheduled inspection of the main rotor assembly and transmission system. Nothing she hadn't done hundreds of times before. The crew chief, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, met her at the aircraft with a clipboard and steaming cup of coffee. "Morning, Santos." She's been making some unusual vibrations during flight operations yesterday. Pilots reported it fell off during hover. Maria nodded, accepting the maintenance log. "Any specific phase of flight?" "Takeoff, cruise, landing. Hover mostly. And some weird harmonics during auto-rotation practice." Rodriguez handed her the keys to the aircraft panels. "I've got you scheduled for 4 hours, but take whatever time you need. Bird's not flying until you sign off on it." As Rodriguez walked away to check on other aircraft, Maria began her systematic approach. She always started with a visual inspection, walking around the helicopter in a clockwise pattern. The Black Hawk was a magnificent machine, 20,000 pounds of precision engineering designed to carry troops into impossible situations and bring them home safely. She checked the landing gear, examining each wheel for wear and proper tire pressure. The fuselage showed the typical signs of hard use: small dents from debris, scratches from countless landings in hostile terrain, and the inevitable oil stains that marked every helicopter in active service. Nothing unusual there. Moving to the tail section, Maria inspected the tail rotor assembly. The smaller rotor was critical for controlling the aircraft direction, and any damage here could be catastrophic. She ran her hands along the composite blades, feeling for cracks or delamination. Everything seemed normal. The real work began when she opened the engine access panels. The Black Hawk's twin General Electric T-700 engines were marvels of modern technology, each producing over 1,500 horsepower. Maria had rebuilt these engines more times than she could count, and she knew every bolt, every gasket, every wire that kept them running. She started with the oil analysis, drawing samples from each engine and transmission. The oil would tell her a story. Metal particles indicated wear, unusual discoloration suggested contamination, and the viscosity revealed how hard the systems had been working. The samples looked normal, but she would send them to the lab for detailed analysis anyway. Next came the vibration analysis equipment. Maria connected accelerometers to various points on the airframe and transmission housing. These sensitive instruments would detect vibrations invisible to human senses, the kind of subtle changes that preceded major mechanical failures. As the computer ran its diagnostic routine, she climbed onto the aircraft to inspect the main rotor head. The rotor head was the heart of the helicopter, where massive forces converged to lift 20,000 pounds of aircraft and cargo into the sky. Each of the 4 main rotor blades attached through a complex assembly of bearings, dampers, and control rods. Maria checked each connection point methodically, looking for cracks, loose bolts, or signs of excessive wear. It was while examining the forward blade attachment that she first noticed something unusual. There, barely visible against the dark metal of the hub assembly, was what appeared to be a marking. At first glance, it looked like a manufacturing stamp or maintenance notation. But as Maria positioned her flashlight at different angles, she realized this was something else entirely. The marking was etched into the metal itself, not stamped or painted. It consisted of several symbols arranged in a circular pattern, each about the size of a quarter. The symbols were unlike anything in her 8 years of aircraft maintenance. Not military designation codes, not manufacturer markings, not standard maintenance notations. Maria pulled out her phone and took several pictures, adjusting the flash and angle to capture the markings clearly. The symbols appear to be hand-etched, though the precision suggested they had been made with specialized tools. Some looked almost runic, like ancient writing she might have seen in a history book. Others were more geometric, triangles within circles, intersecting lines that formed complex patterns. She climbed down from the aircraft and reviewed the photos on her phone screen. The markings were definitely there, definitely deliberate, and definitely not standard. In 8 years of maintenance, she had never seen anything like this on a military aircraft. Every marking, every symbol, every number on these helicopters was documented, regulated, and officially approved. Maria checked the aircraft's maintenance logs, flipping through months of entries from various maintenance personnel. No mention of any non-standard markings. No record of anyone doing unauthorized work on the rotor head assembly. According to the paperwork, the last major work on this component had been a routine bearing replacement 6 months ago, performed by a team she knew well. She climbed back onto the aircraft for a more thorough examination. Using her most powerful flashlight and a magnifying glass from her toolkit, she studied each symbol carefully. The etching was deep enough to be permanent, but shallow enough that it wouldn't affect the structural integrity of the component. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. The first symbol appeared to be 2 intersecting triangles forming a 6-pointed star, but with additional lines that created a more complex geometric pattern. The second looked like a stylized tree or lightning bolt, with branches that split and rejoined in mathematical precision. The third was circular with internal divisions that reminded her of a compass rose, but with too many points and strange proportions. As Maria continued her examination, she noticed that the symbols were arranged in a specific pattern around the hub assembly. They weren't random placements. Each one was positioned at a critical stress point where the rotor blade attachments met the main shaft. It was as if whoever had placed them understood the engineering of the aircraft intimately. The strangest part was the condition of the etchings themselves. Despite being on a component that experienced tremendous stress and vibration during flight operations, the symbols showed no signs of wear. The edges were sharp, the lines clear and deep. It was as if they had been made yesterday, yet the maintenance logs showed no recent work that would have provided access to these areas. Maria's military training kicked in. Unauthorized modifications to aircraft were serious business, court-martial serious. But these weren't modifications in any traditional sense. They didn't alter the function of the aircraft or compromise its safety. They were just there, mysterious, unexplained, and completely outside normal procedures. She photographed each symbol from multiple angles, then took overview shots showing their positions relative to the aircraft components. If she was going to report this, and she would have to, she needed complete documentation. The photos would go up the chain of command, probably ending up on someone's desk at the Pentagon. But first, she needed to finish her assigned maintenance tasks. The vibration analysis had completed, showing results within normal parameters. The oil samples were clean. All the routine inspections checked out perfectly. According to every test and measurement she could perform, the Black Hawk was in excellent condition and ready for flight operations. Maria completed her inspection checklist mechanically, her mind racing with questions about the mysterious symbols. Who had put them there? When? Why? And, most importantly, were there more aircraft with similar markings? She made a mental note to check other helicopters in the unit when time permitted. As she gathered her tools and prepared to close the access panels, Maria took one final look at the symbols. In the changing light of the morning sun, they seemed to shift and dance, the etched lines creating shadows that made them appear almost three-dimensional. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw additional markings, fainter lines that connected the main symbols in an intricate pattern. She blinked and looked again, just the original symbols, exactly as she had documented them. Maria shook her head and attributed the illusion to fatigue and too much caffeine. Weird markings or not, She had a job to do and aircraft to maintain. But as she walked back to the maintenance hangar to complete her paperwork, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled onto something significant. The symbols weren't random graffiti or the work of some bored mechanic. They were too precise, too deliberately placed, too purposeful. In the hangar, she sat at her computer terminal and began typing her maintenance report. Everything was routine and standard until she reached the section for unusual observations. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. How do you report something like this? How do you explain mysterious symbols that shouldn't exist? Maria decided to keep it simple and factual. She typed, "During inspection of main rotor hub assembly, observe non-standard markings etched into metal surface at blade attachment points. Markings do not affect aircraft function or safety. Photographic documentation attached. Recommend investigation by appropriate authority." She attached the photos to the electronic maintenance record and submitted the report. Within hours, it would be reviewed by the maintenance officer, then forwarded up the chain of command. Someone with more authority and security clearance would have to decide what to do about the mysterious symbols on Black Hawk 87 to 24,619. As Maria cleaned her tools and prepared for her next assignment, she wondered if she would ever learn the truth about what she had discovered. Military bureaucracy moved slowly, and explanations, if they came at all, might take weeks or months to filter back down to her level. But she had done the right thing. She had documented everything properly and reported it through official channels. Whatever those symbols meant, whatever their purpose, it was no longer her problem to solve. She was just a maintenance technician doing her job, keeping aircraft safe and airworthy. Yet as she walked across the flight line toward her next assignment, Maria couldn't resist glancing back at the Black Hawk. The aircraft sat quietly in the morning sun, looking perfectly normal and military standard. Only she knew about the hidden symbols etched into its rotor assembly, waiting for someone with answers to explain their presence. The mystery would stay with her, nagging at the back of her mind during routine maintenance tasks and quiet moments. Who had marked that aircraft, and why? And, more troubling, if someone could access a secure military helicopter long enough to etch symbols into critical components, what else might they have done that no one had discovered yet? These questions would follow Maria through the rest of her day. But she had no way of knowing that her discovery would soon attract attention from people and places she had never heard of, people whose job it was to investigate things that didn't fit into normal military operations. The symbols on Black Hawk 87 to 24,619 were about to become someone else's very urgent problem. Senior Airman Jake Morrison had been working aircraft security investigations for 3 years, but he had never seen anything like the report that landed on his desk at 1,400 hours that Tuesday afternoon. The email subject line read, "Priority, unusual markings on UH-60M," with attachments that made his coffee grow cold as he studied them. Morrison worked for the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment Security Division, a unit that most people at Fort Campbell knew existed but rarely interacted with. His job was investigating anything unusual that happened with the regiment's aircraft, security breaches, unauthorized access, suspicious maintenance issues, anything that didn't fit the normal pattern of military aviation operations. The photos from Staff Sergeant Santos showed symbols that definitely didn't fit any normal pattern. Morrison enlarged each image on his dual monitor setup, examining the intricate etchings from every angle. In 3 years of investigations, he had seen unauthorized modifications, security violations, and even cases of suspected sabotage. But he had never seen anything like these precise, mysterious symbols. Morrison's first step was always the same: verify the source and check for any similar incidents. He pulled up Santos's personnel file. 8 years of exemplary service, multiple deployments, advanced maintenance certifications, and a spotless security record. Not the type of person to file false reports or waste investigative resources on pranks. Next, he accessed the aircraft database and began searching for any previous reports of unusual markings on military helicopters. The database contained thousands of maintenance reports, security incidents, and investigation summaries from bases worldwide. Morrison used every keyword combination he could think of: symbols, markings, etchings, unauthorized modifications, graffiti. After 2 hours of searching, he found nothing remotely similar. The closest matches were cases of actual graffiti or unauthorized unit emblems painted on aircraft, all easily explained and quickly resolved. Nothing involving precise geometric symbols etched into critical aircraft components. Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied the photos again. The symbols were clearly deliberate, professionally executed, and placed with knowledge of aircraft engineering. This wasn't the work of some random vandal or bored maintenance worker. Someone with specialized skills and detailed knowledge of helicopter construction had created these markings. His secure phone rang, displaying the extension from Major Patricia Williams, his commanding officer. "Morrison, I need you in my office immediately. Bring everything you have on that Black Hawk report." The security office occupied a windowless section of the building, with restricted access and walls lined with filing cabinets containing classified investigation files. Major Williams was studying printouts of the photos when Morrison entered, her expression serious. "How long have you been working this case?" she asked without preamble. "About 2 hours, ma'am. I was just beginning the preliminary investigation when you called." Williams gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Sit down. We need to discuss some things that don't leave this room." She opened a thick folder marked with classification stamps that Morrison couldn't quite read from his position. "What I'm about to tell you is compartmented information," Williams began. 3 months ago, the Air Force received similar reports from 2 different bases. Symbols etched into aircraft components, photographed by maintenance personnel during routine inspections. Both cases were investigated and classified. Morrison felt his pulse quicken. Similar how? Same symbols. Different symbols, but same precision, same placement at structural stress points, same apparent knowledge of aircraft engineering. Williams pulled out photographs from the folder. These were found on an F-16 at Shaw Air Force Base and a C-130 at Little Rock. The photos showed symbols that were clearly related to the ones Santos had discovered, though not identical. The same geometric precision, the same professional etching technique, the same strategic placement on critical aircraft components. Morrison studied them carefully, noting the similarities and differences. Were the investigations able to determine who made these markings? Morrison asked. Williams shook her head. Both cases hit dead ends. No security breaches, no unauthorized personnel access, no evidence of when or how the symbols were placed. The aircraft had been in service for months with the markings undetected. Security footage showed nothing unusual. Background checks on all personnel with access came back clean. Morrison examined the photos more closely. Each symbol seemed to tell part of a larger story, like pieces of an elaborate puzzle. The geometric patterns were too complex to be random, too precise to be casual graffiti. Someone was deliberately marking military aircraft for reasons unknown. "Ma'am, with respect, this suggests a coordinated effort. Someone with access to multiple military installations, detailed knowledge of aircraft systems, and the skills to create these markings without detection. This could be a significant security threat." "Exactly my thinking," Williams replied, "which is why this investigation just became your top priority. I'm also assigning Technical Sergeant Collins to work with you. She has experience with cryptography and symbolic analysis." Morrison nodded. Technical Sergeant Rebecca Collins was known throughout the unit for her analytical skills and attention to detail. If anyone could decode the meaning of these symbols, it would be her. "I want you to start with a complete background investigation on everyone who has had access to that Black Hawk in the past 6 months," Williams continued. "Maintenance personnel, air crew, security guards, anyone who could have gotten close enough to the rotor assembly to make those markings." "Yes, ma'am. Should I coordinate with base security for access logs and surveillance footage?" "Already in progress." But, Morrison, I want you to understand something. This investigation stays within our unit unless I specifically authorize otherwise. No discussing this case with anyone outside this office without my permission. No casual conversations, no sharing photos, no asking for outside opinions. The classification level was becoming clear to Morrison. Whatever these symbols represented, someone at a very high level considered them sensitive enough to compartmentalize the investigation. This was bigger than simple vandalism or security violations. Morrison spent the remainder of the day setting up his investigation files and reviewing personnel records. The list of people with potential access to Black Hawk 87 to 24,619 was extensive. Dozens of maintenance technicians, multiple aircrew members, security personnel, and various support staff who worked in and around the aircraft. Each name would require a detailed background review, interview scheduling, and security clearance verification. It was painstaking work, but Morrison had learned that investigations were won or lost in the details. Somewhere in those personnel files was likely the answer to who had placed the symbols and why. The next morning, Technical Sergeant Collins arrived with her own stack of files and a laptop loaded with symbol analysis software. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and an intensity that made people instinctively straighten up when she walked into a room. "I've been studying the photos all night," she said without greeting. "These symbols are definitely not random. They follow mathematical principles, probably geometric or astronomical. Some of them remind me of ancient navigational symbols, but modified in ways that suggest modern knowledge." Collins spread printouts across the conference table, each symbol isolated and enlarged. "Look at this one." She pointed to the six-pointed star pattern. "It's similar to traditional astronomical symbols, but with additional elements that could represent specific coordinates or mathematical relationships." Morrison studied the analysis. Could there be some kind of code? Maybe grid coordinates or technical specifications? Possibly. But if they are, it's not any standard military code. I've run them through every cryptographic database I have access to. No matches in any known cipher or symbolic system. The investigation took on a methodical rhythm over the following days. Morrison interviewed maintenance personnel while Collins worked on symbol analysis. Every person with access to the Black Hawk was questioned about their knowledge of the markings, their work schedules, and their observations of anything unusual around the aircraft. The interviews revealed nothing suspicious. Every maintenance technician, aircrew member, and support person seemed genuinely surprised by the existence of the symbols. Several asked to see the photos, expressing curiosity about who might have created such precise markings. No one showed signs of deception or unusual nervousness. Security footage from the hangar and flight line areas showed normal activity patterns. Personnel came and went according to their assigned schedules, performing routine maintenance and operational tasks. Nothing suggested unauthorized access or suspicious behavior around Black Hawk 87 to 24,619. Morrison was beginning to understand why the previous investigations had hit dead ends. Whoever was responsible for the symbols had operated with perfect operational security, leaving no traces of their activities and no witnesses to their work. On Thursday afternoon, Collins made a breakthrough. She had been running the symbols through various databases when she discovered a partial match in an archive of historical documents maintained by the Defense Intelligence Agency. "Morrison, you need to see this," she called from her computer terminal. "I found something in the DIA historical archives. These symbols, or very similar ones, appear in documents from World War II. Morrison hurried over to look at her screen. The document was a declassified intelligence report from 1943, describing strange markings found on captured German aircraft. The symbols were not identical to those found on the modern helicopters, but the geometric principles and placement patterns were remarkably similar. According to this report, Collins continued reading, the markings were discovered on several Luftwaffe aircraft, but German prisoners of war claimed no knowledge of them. The investigation concluded that they were likely some form of resistance marking or underground communication system. Morrison felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to connect in his mind. A communication system, like a way for resistance fighters to identify aircraft or pass information. Maybe, but look at this. Collins highlighted a section of the report. The investigation was closed abruptly in 1944 with no explanation. All evidence was classified and transferred to an unnamed Special Projects Division. The implications were disturbing. If the World War II symbols were related to the modern ones, it suggested a connection spanning decades. Someone or some organization had been placing these markings on military aircraft for over 70 years, operating with such skill and secrecy that they had rarely been detected. Morrison reported the discovery to Major Williams, who studied the historical document with growing concern. The classification stamps on the World War II report indicated involvement by intelligence agencies at the highest levels. "I'm going to make some calls," Williams said finally. "This investigation just became much more complex. Continue your current work, but don't discuss this historical connection with anyone." The fact that these markings have appeared across multiple decades suggests we're dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple vandalism. Morrison returned to his investigation with a new sense of urgency. The symbols on Black Hawk 87 to 24,619 were not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that stretched back to World War II. Someone had been marking military aircraft for 70 years, operating with such effectiveness that their activities had rarely been detected or understood. Who had this kind of access, this level of skill, this operational longevity? It suggested an organization with resources, training, and a very specific interest in military aviation. But what was their purpose? Intelligence gathering? Sabotage preparation? Some form of identification system? As Morrison worked through more personnel files and interview transcripts, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something fundamental. The symbols were too precise to be random, too strategically placed to be decorative, too professionally executed to be amateur work. But they were also too obvious to be effective espionage, too visible to be secure communication, and too benign to be sabotage preparation. Whatever their true purpose, it was something Morrison hadn't considered yet, something that required a different approach to understand. The investigation was about to take another unexpected turn, bringing Morrison and Collins into contact with people whose existence they had never suspected, people whose job was tracking threats that operated in the shadows between official military operations and civilian life. Black Hawk 87 to 24,619 had revealed its secret symbols, but those symbols were only the beginning of a much larger mystery. The call came on Friday morning at 0800 hours, just as Morrison was reviewing the latest personnel background checks. The voice on the secure line identified itself as Agent Sarah Chun from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, and she needed to meet with Morrison and Collins immediately regarding their Black Hawk investigation. Morrison had heard of DCSA, but had never worked directly with them. The agency handled counterintelligence for the entire Department of Defense, investigating threats that could compromise national security. If they were interested in the symbol case, it meant the investigation had attracted attention at the highest levels of military intelligence. Agent Chun arrived at Fort Campbell 2 hours later, accompanied by a second agent who introduced himself only as Agent Park. Both carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to dealing with classified information and serious security threats. Chun was a slight Asian woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the security office as she entered. Park was taller and broader, with the bearing of someone with military background. Neither showed any emotion as Morrison presented his investigation findings. "Before we begin," Chun said, "I need to establish the security protocols for this meeting. Everything we discuss today is classified at the secret level or higher. Nothing leaves this room without specific authorization." Morrison and Collins acknowledged the classification level. They were both cleared for secret information, though Morrison suspected they were about to learn things that would test the limits of their security clearances. Chun opened a briefcase, and removed a thick folder. What you discovered on that Black Hawk is part of a much larger pattern that we've been tracking for several years. The symbols represent a communication system used by an organization that has been operating within the defense establishment for decades. Collins leaned forward. A communication system? We thought they might be code, but we couldn't break them. They're not traditional code, Park explained. They're more like a marking system, a way for members of this organization to identify aircraft that have been prepared for specific purposes. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Prepared how? Are we talking about sabotage? Chin shook her head. Not sabotage in the conventional sense. This organization doesn't appear interested in destroying aircraft or causing immediate harm. Their goals are more subtle and long-term. Chin opened the folder and spread out photographs that made Morrison's investigation seem small in scope. Images of marked aircraft from dozens of military bases, spanning different branches of service and multiple decades. The symbols varied in design, but followed consistent principles: geometric precision, strategic placement, professional execution. We call them the custodians, Chin continued. We don't know their real name, their exact membership, or their ultimate objectives. What we do know is that they have been marking selected military aircraft for over 70 years, and they operate with a level of access and skill that suggests inside knowledge. Collins studied the photographs. Inside knowledge of what? Aircraft engineering? Base security? Maintenance schedules? All of that and more, Park replied. To operate undetected for this long, they would need people inside the military structure itself. Maintenance personnel, security staff, possibly even officers with high clearances. The implications were staggering. Morrison had been investigating what he thought was an isolated incident, but he was actually looking at evidence of a long-term infiltration of military aviation assets by an unknown organization with unknown goals. What do the symbols actually mean? Morrison asked. What are they communicating? Chun hesitated before answering. We believe they're marking aircraft for future use. The symbols appear to indicate specific technical capabilities, mission profiles, or operational readiness levels. When we correlate the markings with subsequent aircraft deployments, we see patterns. What kind of patterns? Collins pressed. Marked aircraft are deployed more frequently to certain geographic regions. They're assigned to specific types of missions more often than statistical probability would suggest. And in a few cases, marked aircraft have been involved in operations that were later classified at levels above normal military activities. Morrison tried to process this information. Are you saying this organization is somehow influencing military operations? Directing where specific aircraft are sent? We don't know, Park admitted. That's why your investigation is important. We need to understand how they're placing these symbols, who's doing it, and what their selection criteria are for marking specific aircraft. Chin pulled out a map marked with colored pins. These represent confirmed symbol discoveries over the past 5 years. Notice any patterns? Morrison studied the map. The pins were scattered across multiple states and countries, but they seemed to cluster around certain types of military installations. Special operations bases, training facilities, and units with unusual mission profiles showed higher concentrations of marked aircraft. They're targeting special capabilities units, Collins observed. Not regular transport or training squadrons, but units with unique mission sets. Exactly. Which brings us to why we're here today. Chin's expression grew more serious. Black Hawk 87 to 24,619 belongs to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers are among the most elite helicopter units in the world, with access to classified operations and specialized equipment. Morrison felt the pieces clicking together. So marking that particular aircraft wasn't random. They specifically chose a helicopter from an elite unit with special operations capabilities. That's our assessment. And it means whoever placed those symbols had detailed knowledge not just of aircraft engineering, but of unit capabilities and operational importance. Park opened a laptop and pulled up a file. We've been tracking personnel with access to multiple marked aircraft across different bases and time periods. The analysis identified several individuals who appear at multiple locations where symbols were discovered. The screen showed a network analysis diagram with names, dates, and locations connected by colored lines. Some of the connections spanned decades, suggesting either very long careers or multiple people working in coordination. These are people we need to investigate more thoroughly, Chen explained. Some are retired military personnel who worked maintenance on marked aircraft early in their careers. Others are civilians with contractor access to military installations. A few are still active duty with security clearances that would give them broad access. Collins pointed to one name that appeared in multiple connections. Master Sergeant David Fleming, retired. He shows up at 5 different bases over a 20-year period, always in maintenance or logistics positions. Fleming is interesting, Park agreed. He retired 3 years ago after 25 years of service. Impeccable record, multiple commendations, trusted with the highest security clearances. But he was present at bases where symbols were discovered spanning from 2003 to 2019. Morrison studied Fleming's service record on the laptop screen. That's not necessarily suspicious. Senior maintenance personnel often get transferred to different bases throughout their careers, and elite units recruit the best people from across the military. True, Chen acknowledged, but Fleming is one of 17 personnel who show similar patterns. Too many coincidences for random chance. Agent Park closed the laptop. Here's what we need from your investigation. Continue your personnel interviews, but focus on anyone who has worked with these 17 identified individuals. Look for relationships, shared assignments, unusual communication patterns. We think the custodians recruit from within the military structure. And be careful, Chen added. If this organization has been operating successfully for 70 years, they have excellent operational security. They may be monitoring official investigations into their activities. Morrison felt a chill of realization. Are you saying they might know we're investigating them? It's possible, which is why this conversation never happened officially. Your investigation continues as a routine security matter, but you report any significant findings directly to us through secure channels. Chun handed Morrison a secure communication device. This connects to our operations center. Use it if you discover anything that suggests active custodian operations or immediate security threats. After the agents left, Morrison and Collins sat in silence for several minutes, processing what they had learned. Their routine investigation had revealed involvement in a counterintelligence operation spanning decades and involving an unknown organization with deep penetration of military aviation assets. This changes everything, Collins said finally. We're not just looking for someone who made unauthorized markings. We're trying to identify members of an organization that has been operating inside the military for 70 years. Morrison nodded, and they're still active. Those symbols on the Black Hawk were fresh, which means someone from this organization recently had access to our aircraft. They spent the afternoon reviewing their investigation files with new perspective. Personnel interviews that had seemed routine now took on greater significance. Background checks that showed normal career patterns might hide deeper connections to the custodian organization. Morrison focused on the 17 names from the DCSA analysis, cross-referencing them with personnel who had access to Black Hawk 87 to 24,619. To his surprise, he found a connection almost immediately. Collins, look at this, he called from his computer terminal. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the crew chief who assigned Santos to inspect that Black Hawk. He worked under Master Sergeant Fleming at Fort Bragg from 2015 to 2017. Collins hurried over to see the connection. That could be coincidence. Fleming was a senior maintenance supervisor. He probably worked with dozens of junior personnel during his career. Maybe, but Rodriguez assigned Santos to inspect that specific aircraft on that specific day. What if that wasn't random? What if he knew the symbols were there and wanted them discovered? The possibility opened new questions about the custodian organization's methods and goals. If Rodriguez was connected to them, why would he want the symbols discovered? What purpose did official investigations serve for their activities? Morrison made secure notes of the connection and prepared a preliminary report for Agent Shun. But as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something fundamental about the custodian's true purpose. The symbols were too visible to be secure communication, too obvious to be effective espionage tools, too benign to be sabotage preparation. If the organization had operated successfully for 70 years, they were clearly intelligent and capable. So why leave markings that could eventually be discovered? Unless discovery was part of their plan. Unless they wanted specific people to find the symbols and begin investigations. Unless the real purpose of the markings was not communication between custodian members, but recruitment of new ones. Morrison looked at the photos of symbols one more time, seeing them now not as mysterious codes, but as tests. Tests to see who would notice unusual details, who would investigate thoroughly, who would follow security protocols, and who would demonstrate the kind of analytical thinking the custodians valued. Staff Sergeant Santos had passed the first test by discovering and reporting the symbols professionally. Morrison and Collins were passing the second test by conducting a thorough investigation. The DCSA agents represented the third level, connecting individual discoveries to the broader pattern. But what was the fourth level? Where did successful investigation lead? And what was the custodian's ultimate purpose in marking military aircraft for 70 years? Morrison suspected he was about to find out. The secure communication device Agent Shun had given him would likely ring soon with answers to questions he hadn't thought to ask yet. The investigation of Black Hawk 87 to 24,619 was complete, but Morrison's involvement with the custodians was just beginning. As he completed his final report, Morrison reflected on how much had changed since Santos first photographed those mysterious symbols. A routine maintenance inspection had revealed a decade-spanning mystery that reached into the highest levels of military intelligence. Somewhere in the defense establishment, an organization operated with purposes and methods that even counterintelligence agencies didn't fully understand. The Black Hawk sound the flight line, its symbols now documented and investigated, ready to return to normal operations. But Morrison knew that nothing about military aviation would seem quite normal to him again. The custodians were still out there, still marking aircraft, still pursuing goals that remained hidden in the shadows of classified operations and compartmented information. The mystery was far from solved, but Morrison had done his part in uncovering it. Whether that would prove to be a service to national security or the first step into a world he wasn't prepared for remained to be seen.